Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good middle of the night for those in Asia. I'm Michael Goldberg. I'm the professor for Beyond Silicon Valley, Growing Entrepreneurship in Transitioning Economies. Welcome to the second session of the MOOC, our first interactive session, panel discussion. We're so thrilled to have such a great panel here today. What I will do is ask our panelists to quickly introduce themselves, and then, as we do with every panel, we'll get right to your questions. We've got some that came into the discussion forums over the past couple days, and to those of you that have been posting away and sending in your personal learning assignments, awesome job. I've enjoyed reading what you guys are doing. We will go from there, and we'll go for an hour. So Lisa, do you want to start?
Sure. Good morning, I'm Lisa Delp. I am currently an entrepreneur in residence with Lorain County Community College, and I'm the former executive director of the Ohio Third Frontier. Experienced in business, I've been a business consultant and a business owner for about 20 years. So very looking forward to having the conversations with you about your businesses and your economic development activities around the world.
Great. Chara?
I'm Charu Ramanathan. I'm the co-founder and chief scientific officer of Cardio Insight. It's a local medical device company, Case Western University spin-off, Cleveland-born, Cleveland-bred. I have a background in biomedical engineering, and all my business experience has been trial by fire.
And Stephen Coltai joining us via the Webex in Washington, D.C. Stephen, thanks for making the time.
Absolutely, my pleasure. I'm Stephen Coltai. I was the head of the Global Entrepreneurship Program at the U.S. Department of State under Hillary Clinton. The Global Entrepreneurship Program was an initiative by the State Department to spur entrepreneurship development around the world, but particularly at that time in Muslim countries. I've since left the State Department, and I now consult in entrepreneurship ecosystem development. I'm writing a book on entrepreneurship around the world based at the Brookings Institution here in Washington. I'm a business guy, 30 years of business experience, several startups, mostly in the entertainment and media industry. I'm from Los Angeles and spent a decade at Warner Brothers, ending as the COO there.
Great. Well, thanks, Stephen, Charu, and Lisa. Lee Poseidon isn't able to join us today, but we will start from here. The first question actually is going to go back over to you, Stephen, came from our discussion forums. Hyacinthe Kouassi, I believe from France, wants to ask Stephen Coltai how he thinks governments that are struggling to find budget for sectors like health and education, such as in Africa, might find ways to implement a program to support entrepreneurship like the Ohio Third Frontier.
Well, I mean, it's a great and sort of eternal question about priorities. There are two things I would say. One is that of all of the things that government is asked to fund, frankly, entrepreneurship development is really it can be very, very inexpensive. Much less expensive than many other government programs. A little bit goes a long way. And there are a lot of things that can be done that really do have tremendous impact. So, for example, one of the things I think is always most important are mentoring networks. Those are relatively inexpensive to create. And it's really about people and connecting people and doing the work to figure out what the best matches are. So that's the first comment I would make. The second comment I would make is that I think one of the real shortcomings, one of the problems we have in the entrepreneurship business, if you will, is that we haven't made the case well enough about how fundamental entrepreneurship development is generally to economic development and the overall health of a particular community or society. So to me, it really is a must-have, not a nice-to-have, because it's really about jobs ultimately, and jobs to me are the single most important thing in a healthy community.
Great, thanks, Stephen. Lisa, just sort of following on that, and it's a good follow-up question. Robert Welsh from Kyrgyzstan wanted to know if there's an essential difference between government's role in fostering entrepreneurship in an economy that's transitioning from an economic depression and an economy that's transitioning from a non-market system into a capitalist system. I mean, you've done some work overseas. I'm sort of curious in thinking about the work in the third frontier, which sort of fits in that first category we went through, a real economic hardship here in Ohio, versus some of the things that you've seen in markets like a Tunisia or in Egypt.
Sure. Well, I think the challenge in changing a market from into a more capitalist mode gets all the way down into the legal system. I mean, here in Ohio, we needed to find and align the resources necessary to develop something that we were already building. But I think in some of these nations where it's not, where entrepreneurship, where self-employment, where small business has not been the norm, I think there are challenges within the legal structures that prohibit or hinder the development of small businesses or investment activities. We saw in Tunisia a great desire by the government and the local economic development organizations to start an early stage capital fund, but it was prohibited through the constitutional law. So those things have to be addressed first, but I think you still have to assess and understand what your resources are and what the needs are, so you can chip away at that. You can still do the business development in as much as you can help entrepreneurs learn to operate effectively. You can form the mentoring networks, as Stephen said. You can start to develop your ecosystem and address those legal issues on a parallel path.
Great. Charlie, let me ask you, there's a question from Daniel from Ostrava, Czech Republic. I actually had the chance to go to Ostrava this summer. Very nice place. He mentioned that he noticed in his country there's numerous government entities and players who are all trying to promote entrepreneurship but aren't coordinating, and also talks about goals and objectives changing every 4 to 5 years. I mean, you, throughout the span of Cardio Insight, you've tapped into a number of different government grant programs, initiative, working with NGOs. What advice do you have for a community and for entrepreneurs that may be trying to take advantage of this array of programming for how you navigate that?
So, you know, we had the same feeling in Cleveland. This was around the 2006, 2005 timeframe, when there were a variety of organizations that in paper kind of looked like they promoted the same thing, but for an entrepreneur, you don't know where. You have a technology, you have a bunch of business issues that you need to solve to get started. It was really difficult for us to say, you know, we're going to approach this organization for help or that organization for help. To that extent, things changed here in consolidating several organizations. So for us, we had 3 groups of organizations that we looked into. The first group was for business advice, kind of the network of mentors, entrepreneurs, and residents that would kind of say, where should we get started? What are the top issues we could focus on? And what our preliminary business strategy would look like? That's one group. The second group was the group that was capable of investing seed stage capital. I believe that's a very vital group because they're also, at least in Ohio, partly government funded, so they are able to make those risky decisions that a traditional VC or a private capital investor would not make on a company that was our size. We had no systems, no prototype, just a technology and lots of promising words. And the third group are government organizations like the Third Frontier, whom we access directly. So we looked for grant calls, RFPs, and then we just applied for directly and worked with the Third Frontier directly. And these were the 3 pieces. And if you notice, 2 of them are capital, one is advice. And I think that, to me, is so critical. Advice is free. Somebody that can put money in, and the first money is always difficult to come. Money begets more money. And I can't be more emphatic about it. You need to take a chance on these entrepreneurs because like Stephen said, you have to believe that you've got to plant 10 trees to have at least 2 or 3 flower. But if you don't take a chance, then it's not going to happen.
Lisa, any reflections on, I mean, you, from where your seat was in the Third Frontier and a lot of these organizations and maybe the alphabet soup of the NGO world that sort of is created when there are resources to implement programs. From where you sat, how did you deal with kind of those competing forces of many, as kind of Daniel alludes to, with many people wanting to kind of get into the entrepreneurship support business. How did you make those decisions from where you sat in government?
Well, the third frontier was regionally focused. So in the 6 regions, a lead applicant was identified early on in the process, and it was that applicant that was tasked with organizing the local ecosystem around them. So all of the various participants became collaborators with the lead applicant, and so there was self-policing of the network at the local level. So the state didn't have to manage as much of that. Now, we did have to manage the 6 entrepreneurial signature organizations around the state, but they had different goals and different objectives that were more regionally focused. We did not put in place a cookie cutter process or cookie cutter system that required everyone to look alike. So I think those things really helped us, and the fact that we were coming from we were the capital provider at the end of the day, so we could be very dictatorial about the way the process went together and the way that the structures were put in place and the way people worked together.
Great. We have a question from the chat. Oh, Stephen, did you want to chime in?
Because I think that both of these, points were really important. What Lisa and Charu said. When I talk about the importance of mentorship, one of the things that I think people don't think about enough, the most scarce resource for any entrepreneur is time, and your own time, and what you're going to spend time doing. And there is, there are all sorts of people out there, different organizations who are offering you things, and you need to leverage your time. You can't pursue every one of these things, and many of them are dead ends. So when I talk about the importance of mentorship, we don't always think about all the things that you could divest yourself of as an entrepreneur. To others in your organization, including mentors. And one of those is helping to track down what are the worthwhile and really useful organizations that have a service or a product that you need right now, that you can get a mentor to help you sort through rather than you doing it yourself. So one of the ways to think about using mentors includes accessing and ferreting out the most effective local support.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Looks like we have somebody who's joining us for a video question. Welcome.
Hi, Sarah. You're on with the panel. Siri, you're on with the panel.
Hi.
Hi there. Welcome. Look forward to your question.
Hi, everybody.
Hi there. Hi, we can hear you. Great.
Okay, my name is Thierry Bijou. I'm from Haiti. Okay, I have a question about entrepreneurship. I had promotion investment in Haiti, and we've been
So we're having a little bit of a bandwidth issue.
In Haiti for a couple of years.
Hi, Michael. It looks like we are having some bandwidth issues here from Siri. So his question is, as a former promotion investment director in Haiti, we spent 2 years trying to attract FDI. But from what I understand from the early reading of the course, we need a good entrepreneurial ecosystem. The head of government could not understand that. What are the 3 most important points of a good ecosystem?
Great question there. Stephen, maybe you can start just from your old hat with the State Department when you think of foreign direct investment, and next week's topic is really going to look at donor funding of entrepreneurship. So I'll look forward to your engagement theory on that. But Stephen, any reflection from your perspective on sort of donor support of and the key areas? Stephen, we can't hear you. Okay, Lisa. It's a good thing I have people in person. Sorry, Stephen, we couldn't hear you. Let's have Lisa, or maybe another part of Theory's question. Yeah.
Well, I think the three key things are ideas, capital, and the community. The thing that was very beneficial with the Third Frontier was organizing the community together to move forward, and organizing the entrepreneurs around the ideas and helping to build traction with those entrepreneurs and with those ideas. And then the capital came to that. There are always investors looking for good opportunities, and so they will come to where the opportunities are. You have to promote those opportunities, which is where your community comes into play. They're able to tell their high net worth individual friends that there are opportunities to be had. I think it's very challenging for government to understand private sector investing. It's quite a different animal. The government is focused on jobs and on the economic development side of it, and the investor community is focused on the return on their investment.
Great, thanks, Lisa. It looks like we have another question from the chat room. Suzanne?
Hi, yes, the question is from, and I'm going to apologize for the name, Onikashi from Nigeria.
Okay.
Her question is, what does it take to build a good entrepreneurial ecosystem in a developing economy like Nigeria? And what can entrepreneurs do to contribute positively to this ecosystem?
So Charu, I'll put you on the spot given where you've come from and where you are now. I know you still have family and friends back in India. When you think about the journey that you made as a PhD student to come to the US, and obviously you've tapped into the ecosystem here, as you reflect back on India and see some of the things that are happening there, can you, any thoughts about the question coming from our student in Nigeria?
No, I think one of the key things that a society or an ecosystem, however, can provide for youth entrepreneurs is really the ability to take risks. So, social pressures, conditioning, you see a ladder, do you see an opportunity or do you see a trap waiting for you at the top of it? And that's really social conditioning. And we had a very brief conversation about the lack of women in this. And a lot of it is things that we're taught to do and expected to do. For example, in India, because it's so populated, you go to college at 17, you have to decide what is it that you want to be when you're 22 and you finish. So you're already making your career pathways, and it's to get a job, to get a salary, to get married, to have children, and so on. And that is changing quite rapidly. I can say for the past 5 years I've noticed this, but that has got to change. That people need to think that their safety nets, their family support structures, urbanization, support from their local group, social group is enough that they can take risks. Because entrepreneurship is also about risks and taking chances and believing in yourself that I can only see the next step, but once I get there, I will know what the next step looks like. And those, the mentors, those advisors, those are also available now. And people are talking and thinking differently. So I'm very, very optimistic for India.
Great. Stephen, do you want to jump in on that question?
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Thanks.
Okay. The only thing I was going to say is there's no question, and the point has been made before, that the regulatory environment is critical, and what is sometimes called the enabling environment, which affects obviously both investors in terms of the rules around investment, taxation, repatriation of profits, currency risk, but also with respect to the entrepreneur themselves. And I think one of the things that, and I certainly agree that, you have to work on, I think Lisa said this, I mean, you have to, there are things that you can control within the ecosystem that are non-governmental, But I think it's naive to not also recognize that there are things you can't control that do require government to be involved and do require a champion in government who recognizes that if you really want to make a difference in economic development and attracting foreign investment, you are going to have to make some changes in the regulatory environment. So I think that as difficult as it is for entrepreneurs to be, responsible for everything from their own business to changing the regulatory environment, the fact is that somebody inside the country has to be shining a light on that need.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Suzanne, I know we have another question from the chat room.
We do. We have Badi. Badi, you're on with the panel.
Hi, can you hear me?
We can. Welcome, Fadi. Or Badi.
Nice to meet you all. I have just a short question regarding the first video that we saw, and it was talking about strong community leaders, that those are needed, and I would like to know what are some of the examples of strong community leaders.
Sure. And Badi, where are you calling in from?
London, but my hometown is Berlin.
Okay. I missed the last.
Berlin.
Berlin. Okay, great. Thanks, Badi. Thanks for calling in. Lisa, do you want to talk about the coming together of leaders? I know your leadership at the Third Frontier came a bit after some of the initial leaders in the government business community, but maybe you can talk about why it was critical for all the sectors of the community to come together to sort of move Ohio forward.
Sure. So community leadership and engagement by the thought leaders in the community is very important, because those people are the influencers of the rest of the population. So if you have individuals that are members of a large foundation, they're members of the academic community, university leadership, industry leadership, people who can, as I say, influence the community, but they can also push opportunities toward the ecosystem. So whether it's encouraging faculty to commercialize their technology and move their ideas from the research laboratory into the market, or it's foundations who can encourage their individual donors to participate in the process, or it's local government leadership who can facilitate those connections and move the legal forces forward, as Stephen was talking about. I think all of those things are necessary. And then you have the investment community, people who have been successful in their investment activity in the past, who now can look at the ecosystem objectively and with a profit in mind and say, yes, there really are good deals here. And then I think the last is the entrepreneurial community. Serial entrepreneurs, cashed out entrepreneurs who are coming back to their communities to do something, to be engaged. Those people can help to stimulate entrepreneurial thinking and those ideas and provide encouragement to the up and coming entrepreneurs.
Great. We have another question from the chat room.
We do. Anne, you're on with the panel. You can ask your question.
Hi there. Look forward to your question.
Okay, looks like we might be having some audio issues. The question is, do you think that a state bank dedicated to SMEs can play the role of the Ohio Third Frontier program? In that case, what can be the key aspects for success of this bank?
Good question. Maybe Stephen, any thoughts on your end about kind of traditional banks playing a role in supporting entrepreneurship?
Traditional banks, you mean commercial banks?
It sounded like it was a state. I mean, just from the question, a state bank. I'm assuming it's a commercial bank.
Well, I mean, the only thing I would say, obviously, I can't address the Ohio situation particularly, which you guys can, but there are. I always say that commercial banks are not in the business of supporting entrepreneurs, and it's a great misapprehension to think that commercial are a source of funding for entrepreneurs. They're really not, and that's true in developed countries as well as developing countries. So I discourage people from spending very much time and energy trying to work with traditional commercial banks. Government funds, which are development banks, are a different story, and that obviously varies greatly depending on where you are. And the only thing I'll say there is that, generally speaking, it is very difficult to get $50,000 to $200,000 worth of investment, and that is the level of investment that early stage entrepreneurs are looking for. So you can spend spin your wheels for a long time trying to get a small amount from a very big player, which I again don't think is a very efficient use of the entrepreneur's time and energy.
Right, and maybe you can illuminate on this, Charu, a little bit, just for the viewers who may not know the challenges of an entrepreneur, and particularly something that's technology based. And what would have been the reaction? Did you even think about trying to get a commercial banking loan early on? And if you had, what would have been the reaction?
No, I think that because the structure is different, the risk tolerance is different, the collaterals are different in a startup, other than a lot of promises and a very rudimentary business plan you really don't have. And then like Stephen said, to change that risk profile and thinking and go through several layers, that was not a path we looked into. But this kind of reminded me of another avenue which I've seen in Europe very popular is R&D tax credits. So while it's not direct capital, let's say you have $50,000 and you want to spend all of it on R&D, which is typically what we do especially with technical startups also, is you can, I know in France, for example, and Canada too, between 80 and 90% of the money that you spend in research and development, you get it back from the government. Mm-hmm. That I think is a very nice way, without much of administrative overhead, to help these companies really keep on recycling their capital.
Good point. Another question from the chat room.
Evangelos, you're on with Michael on the panel.
Go ahead. Welcome.
Yes.
Yes, hi there. Look forward to your question.
Can you listen to me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so my question is, what is the role of the new entrepreneurs in this new era we are stepping in, that needs a specific mindset for new, younger or older people, and governments do not take action to give this knowledge?
Great.
My question is, what is the responsibility of those who are already in this change, and how can they help?
Okay, great. Thanks. And where are you joining us from, Evangelos?
I'm from Greece.
Okay, Greece. Okay. I had a great trip this summer to Greece, meeting a lot of students from the first MOOC, so I'm glad that we have participants now. Lisa, maybe you can reflect on that kind of it sounds like the crux of the question was, how does sort of the traditional establishment or people that have sort of benefited before kind of engage and give forward to new entrepreneurs and get them into the system?
Well, I think mentoring seems to be a theme that we keep coming up with today. But I think that's very important, is to provide mentorship and to provide support to the entrepreneurs in sort of an emotional way. And if you have successful entrepreneurs who have the means to do so, they may form your first early stage capital groups and can provide investment that way. But you have to understand that while it is a good thing to do, it's not a responsibility necessarily of the earlier generations of entrepreneurs to be the sole source of support for the next generation. I know that sounds a little bit harsh. It's a little like the banking. Banks aren't in the business to lend money. But I think there is a responsibility in as much as those entrepreneurs can share their knowledge, share their experience. They can talk about the successes they have, which encourage other entrepreneurs, and I think and encourage governments ultimately to make those choices because they can see the benefits. The challenge with initiatives like this is they're very long-term, and governments don't like long-term activities. They want short-term returns on their investment. So helping them to understand how over time the jobs have grown, the wealth has grown, the opportunities have grown. Those are the things that the more successful, more established entrepreneurs can do to help.
Great. Another question, and thanks, Evangelos, for the question. Another question from the chat room.
Sanjaya with the panel.
Great, welcome.
Hi.
Hi, go ahead with your question.
Yeah, can you hear me?
We can, great.
Okay, I just have a question. If our startup ventures doesn't have anything to do with the government's objective, for example, in supporting a tax revenue, creating a jobs in the local community, do we still need to partner with the government, or we have to do it our own or find the funding ourselves?
Great question. Where are you joining us from?
Singapore, sorry.
Singapore, okay, very good. Stephen, do you want to respond to that?
Well, let me just say that I think it is that any business needs to have a business model that is independent of government assistance. So that's true for everyone. If your business is wholly dependent on government support, then you need to rethink your business model. I do think that there are government. The best alternative is for government to be neutral. And what most people say, at least in developing countries, is, if I could just get the government to not be a negative factor, I'd be happy. So
great. Charu, any reflection? I mean, you've taken and benefited from a lot of government funding along the way. Yeah. Is there any part of you that wishes you were able to do it without government funding, or is it just sort of the reality of you've taken what opportunities have been available to you?
No, I think that I reflect what Stephen said. It can't be solely, your funding avenue. Like, for example, there are a lot of translational grants like SBIR, STTR from the federal government. And I know a lot of entrepreneurs depend on that solely. And the primary motivation for that is anti-dilution. They don't want to be diluted. I think that those are, to me, if you are really successful, let's all make a really giant, rich pie and be successful together. And so we can move forward fast. Because for a technology company like us, time to market is really key. So I think from that perspective, absolutely, I would say government funding was enabling for us.
Maybe you can just touch on, because not all of our students may be familiar with dilution. Can you just explain what that means and why an entrepreneur may not want to be diluted?
Sure. So basically, when you start your company, you own all of it. And if somebody wants to invest money in your company, they will own a piece of it. And therefore, your slice, your piece gets smaller. But your pie is growing because it's grown that much more with the capital invested and the value that you're creating. So with respect to government capital, typically it's not dilutive because it's usually a loan or a debt of some sort that you have to pay back, or else you create jobs, you provide the economic value proposition back to the government of growing that ecosystem. So it's very, very attractive from that perspective. But it is, in terms of, as Lisa said, the structure and the degree of preparedness that you need is no less than what you would expect from a venture capital, except it all has to be provided upfront on paper so that it can be evaluated by a team versus interactive discussions as you would see in a more traditional private capital scenario.
Great. Thanks, Charu. Another question from the chat room.
Yes, Sophie would like us to ask, and Sophie's from Malaysia, could you please help me ask my question? Some government programs work better than others. What are the factors that, in your experience, may cause some programs in some countries to be less successful?
Lisa, do you want to start?
That's a very broad question. I think factors that hinder success of government programs is a lack of focus. Just saying we want to to fund jobs. Well, that you can't just broaden it out like that. You have to be focused. You may say, we want to fund training at universities that facilitate students to get jobs in a specific industry, or we want to provide funding so that technology can be converted from research laboratories to a commercial application. So I think you can't introduce programs that just say, well, we're going to do good things and let it go at that. You really have to have a plan. You have to have an evaluation of your assets and your ecosystem and an understanding of where you want to go, what your goals are. It's just as if you were an entrepreneur. You have to have a product and a business model and a plan and the right people around it and the right resources to make it work.
Stephen, any additional thoughts on that question?
Well, I think that the point Lisa made about the right people around it is critical. Government is usually very bad at actually executing and implementing programs. What government can do is it can muster money, and it can find a focus for what the goals are of a particular program, but it needs to work through other organizations. And so whether that is through contracting, you know, with a third party, or whether it is through a grant to an executing entity, that's really key. And I think that if you look at some of the case studies, which I spend a fair bit of time doing about what works and what doesn't work, that usually it's the implementing partner that is critical in success.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Another question from the chat room. Suzanne.
Vladimir, you're on with the panel. You can go ahead and ask your question.
Welcome, Vladimir.
Okay, Vladimir appears to be having audio issues. His question is, what do you know about coming changes of U.S. legislation for foreign entrepreneurs?
Stephen?
Well, the big issue, obviously, which is a very big issue, is immigration reform, and there's a huge amount of discussion here in the States about visa status for entrepreneurs, including for foreign students who've come to the U.S. And want to stay here to start their companies. Charu may be one of those, I don't know. But visa and immigration reform is the #1 issue. And just parenthetically, some of the biggest money that is being spent on immigration reform in the U.S. is coming from Silicon Valley investors, VCs, and cashed-out entrepreneurs who recognize that, you know, over half of startups, for example, in the Valley today, have a C-level employee that is a non-Native American, who's an immigrant. And so the problems that we are having in helping people come here and set up businesses are now very much front and center in the immigration debate.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Another question from the chat room? Was there someone else?
Yes, this question is from Hassan. Is it critical in developing markets and emerging entrepreneurial communities to have local successful entrepreneurs to support new startups in an advisory role?
Maybe Charu, do you want to take that?
Absolutely. I think that there's something that comes from someone that has been through this similar path, and then that advice is priceless. Basically, what not to do is as important as what to do. And for us, we receive that from Gil Van Bokkelen, of a local biopharmaceutical company, Athersys, and and that was really, and you kind of in the trenches together. He was more again, serial entrepreneurs, another very important resource, as well as their VC networks. You're basically convincing another entrepreneur, a person of the same mindset, to say that, trust in me, believe in me, teach me, coach me, mentor me, and then they open their networks to you, which I think is really the only way to get forward fast. And I think that's why ecosystems like in Boston, Silicon Valley are so successful, because there's this landslide of entrepreneurial culture and entrepreneurs who serve on other boards, who are serve advisory roles, capital, and it's just it's an avalanche right there. And we don't have it here in Cleveland. We'll get there soon, someday. But I think it's absolutely important. I really do. Thanks,
Charu. Lisa, let me ask you a question that came into one of the discussion forums. Greg Horn, who is an entrepreneur, a U.S. entrepreneur, spent some time in South America, is now based in Hawaii. He asked a question about the third-party evaluation system that the Third Frontier used. He said, how can governments choose an unbiased third-party evaluator that helps choose the entrepreneurs that would receive funding? Isn't that simply taking the bias away from government and placing it in the hands of a company that is evaluating?
That's a great question, and it is a huge challenge for government to make awards of the magnitude that they did with the Third Frontier. And so one of the things that's written into the constitutional law that governs the Third Frontier is the requirement for third-party evaluations. So what the state does is it puts out an RFP, a request for proposals, from companies who have expertise in evaluating materials, evaluating technologies. They may have some technology experience or entrepreneurial experience of their own. And then the state just goes through the normal contracting process, but they also must provide conflict management and full disclosure of any connections that they may have to a specific applicant. There isn't a single third-party evaluator that works in all the programs. There are multiple groups that work for pre-seed capital or the entrepreneurship programs or the incubator programs. So I think you can find individuals who have the expertise that you need, and then you manage their potential conflicts on an individual basis as those arise.
Great. Suzanne, I know we have a question from the chat room.
Hi, Elaine, are you there with the panel? Okay, Elaine's question is, should government view support for social entrepreneurs differently to support other types of, should government support social entrepreneurs differently than other types of entrepreneurs?
Great question. Stephen, do you want to take that?
Well, I agree that is a great question, and I'm going to say something that might be controversial, which is that I don't believe there's a difference between social entrepreneurship and any other kind of entrepreneurship. So if a product or service doesn't have a market, doesn't have a benefit, then it's probably not a sustainable business anyway. And so I tend to believe that there's not a very big difference. I also believe, probably even more importantly, that there's no difference in the requirements to be successful, both on the part of the entrepreneur and on the ecosystem that supports that entrepreneur. So for all practical purposes, they are one and the same, and I don't think that that there's a meaningful difference. I do think that there are things that have a social benefit that is greater or lesser than other things. So, for example, I think that businesses that produce clean drinking water might have a greater social benefit than businesses that produce sugary snacks. And therefore, you do have to recognize that you have to have public investment for public good early on. But even the clean drinking water business, if it doesn't have a sustainable business model long term, if people aren't prepared to pay for the product at a level that's sufficient to generate a profit to those who are engaged in it, it won't survive. So they both operate in the same world.
Great. Thanks, Stephen. Suzanne, another question from the chat room.
Sure. This is from David. We've been working on building a grassroots entrepreneurial community in Toowoomba, regional Australia. Should we start engagement to assist via local government before state and federal, or work back the other way?
Great question. Lisa?
I think that engagement at the local level is very important, and having that support from a governmental entity when you make your case to the larger, the higher bodies is going to be beneficial to you. It will also help to identify the assets and resources that you already have on the ground as you're approaching this. So I think, you know, it's always a good thing to engage those government representatives who are willing to talk about the matter, who have some expertise and who are willing to participate.
Great. Another question from the chat room.
Yes, hi. This is from Airfran. How should investments in high-tech startups from developing countries be structured if Series VC funding seeks U.S. Silicon Valley investment considerations? Is it necessary to contemplate business startup setup domicile in the U.S. with IP transfers?
Okay, interesting question. I don't know, Chara, do you want to? I think he was talking, so there are probably two pieces. One is raising capital from professional investors, which you've obviously been able to do along the way. And I think the second piece is around where the corporate entity should be. So if, I assume maybe he's talking about a company that is based overseas, do they need to sort of set up a U.S. corporate entity in order to access capital here?
Well, I guess it depends on the kind of business, because for our kind of business, which is lots of R&D, lots of clinical development, you know, you just can't have an investor or a board member that's remote. There's no absentee. You know, you really want to see how your money is growing. So for us, as a company in Cleveland, let's say, for example, it was really difficult for us to get capital from outside of Cleveland in the beginning stages till we gathered a certain level of momentum and we had other investors and the network kind of survived. So I think the answer in general, it's more difficult without having a local presence in the country or even in the state, city, whatever it is, depending on how large it is, that you're seeking investment for the company to be having headquarters or at least a presence there.
And let me ask you a quick follow-up question, because I know you struggled early on because we in Cleveland didn't have a lot of available venture capital. Maybe you can sort of reflect for the students about that sort of journey when you're trying to raise money in a community where there's not a traditional hub of venture capital. When do you go outside, and sort of at what stage? Because I know you've been successful in raising some capital outside of the region, but it's taken a lot longer. Maybe you can reflect on that.
Sure. So in our evolution, we had initially seed financing from actually government-funded agencies like Jumpstart and CASE. And we also were lucky that one of the Bay Area investment firms that had a branch in Pittsburgh, and then they had a branch in Cleveland, happened to collaborate with the university. So essentially they made a branch here, which worked out for us for a small amount of investment, and they've become partners with us through subsequent rounds. And then in terms of attracting other venture capital, after we grew to a certain size, $7–8 million, then we attracted through networks of people already present. So basically there was a trusted network within the company, rather than here's the entrepreneurs, here's the opportunity, let's evaluate from ground zero what this is about. So that really, really helps a lot, like the word of mouth, essentially.
Right. That's helpful. Great.
Yeah.
Question from the chat room. Suzanne?
Yes, this is from Zishan in Pakistan. What do you do when your government works against you? They created a lot of programs, but with corruption and so much bureaucracy, that the only thing you get is frustration. So while all of the world praised them for ICT friendly, you know what is reality.
Great question, Stephen. Do you want to address that?
Well, first of all, I want to say that since my experience is mostly working with entrepreneurs in developing countries, I would say that the number one issue is what has just been identified. It's not how the government helps you, but how to keep the government from hurting you. And usually that corruption is number one on that list. And unfortunately, the only thing I have seen that has been successful in multiple geographies goes back to the mentorship issue. There's nobody who can advise you how to navigate in your own country better than somebody who has been successful in doing so in your own country. And one point I just want to make that I had wanted to make earlier, since we talk about the importance of mentorship so much in this session, one thing that I think people don't think about enough, entrepreneurs in developing countries don't think about enough, is diaspora mentors. So, for example, Pakistan is a fantastic example. Pakistan has an unbelievably successful diaspora of Pakistani entrepreneurs, including in the United States. There's an organization, as you probably know, OPEN, the Organization of Pakistani Entrepreneurs in North America, which is exclusively about successful diaspora entrepreneurs, some of whom have gotten so frustrated that they've left, and some of whom have gone back and been able to be successful in their home country. But these are people who I strongly urge you, who are in developing countries and dealing with corruption, to reach out to, are your diaspora entrepreneurs.
Great. We have time for one more question, and we'll take it from the chat room. And for those of you who we weren't able to get to because of the time, please do post your questions in the discussion forums, and hopefully Lisa and Charu and maybe Stephen can jump in. Lisa's been a great poster, can jump in, and we can ask some of those, answer some of those questions offline. But so let's go for the last question from Suzanne.
Hi, the last question is from Siri. Should the government be involved in network business or entrepreneurs, or is there a risk of partisanism?
So should the government be involved? I don't know how you understood that question.
I think what I understood was more the direct engagement of government in the building of the networks. And I think that the government, depending on the magnitude of funding, with a lot of money, it's very easy for government to say this is the way that we'll operate and this is our structure. But I think it's always good for government representatives to be engaged in the entrepreneurial community. It helps them to understand the needs of the entrepreneur, what's working, what's not working, if there are barriers that have been created deliberately or inadvertently through legislation, if there are changes that can be made that stimulate entrepreneurial activity. So I think making that a collaborative conversation between government and between industry, small business, large business, the university system, that's always a really important thing. One of the things that's been vital here in Ohio and in Northeast Ohio is a great example, is that we all talk to each other. We talk to each other about deals, we talk to each other about opportunities, we talk to each other about gaps in training of new workers, in funding, in resources. And because of that, we're all very much aware of what's needed next, what we have, what assets are available to us. And as Stephen mentioned early on, entrepreneurs don't have a lot of time. So they need direct routes to information. And if there's a large collaborative, if there's a lot of people kind of monitoring the ecosystem and monitoring the network and understanding it, things happen much more efficiently and much more effectively than if everyone was trying to do it on their own.
Great. Well, with that, Stephen, Charu, and Lisa, thank you so much for taking the time to join the panel. It's really such a rich opportunity in the world in which we have all MOOC students from all over the world and with different time zones, the ability to engage in a live way with our students. This session will be posted on within the next couple of days up on the site so that people can sort of watch this later. And please continue the great dialogue that you all are doing in the discussion forums. It's great. We will join again. Our next panel discussion will be on October the 15th. It'll be a couple of hours later. It'll be at noon Eastern time, and we will talk about the role of donors in supporting entrepreneurship. So until then, thank you again for joining, and I'll look forward to see you in the discussion forum. Have a great day.